60 years after voyaging to the New World in 1630, mass hysteria spread throughout the Puritan town of Salem, Massachusetts, leading to a massive catastrophe that has been with America throughout history since 1692. Many innocents were murdered, much more falsely accused during the event of the Salem Witch Trials. But eventually, the brutal episode officially reached a compromise in 1697 that would leave a heavy atmosphere over Salem and influence the years to come. Witch huntings have been common for many centuries, starting around the 15th century. Many people in the world were traditionally religious and often had a very tight bond and belief in God and his teachings. Due to the lack of technological advances, people believed any wrong that came to them was the work of Satan and his subjects, one being witches. This thinking became especially popular when Pope Innocent VIII wrote the proclamation Summis Desiderantes against witchcraft and magic. This document was produced upon request from Heinrich Kramer, a German inquisitor. It became quite popular and influenced many books to be written against witchcraft, including The Hammer of Witches and Witch Trials. They were used to guide witch trials, tortures, and discoveries. These books, however, weren't based off of any evidence and mostly came from folklore knowledge. Everyone was a possible target, and no one was truly safe from witchcraft accusations regardless of sex, age, or financial status. Anyone was at risk, which made these times quite troubling. By the 17th century, witch hunting slowed down after Frederick Spee wrote about how there was no true evidence against the witches and how it was unjust to the average citizen. Huntings became less common, but some episodes did occur, such as the one run by Salem Puritans. Puritanism was first founded as a stem off the Church of England during the 1530s. Much like its predecessor, the Church of Rome, there are many issues within the church's structure and attendance. The priests were very poor and mostly illiterate, and under the reigning King Henry VIII, no one had the permission to change the teachings. Alongside this, the priests were above the law and were not punished to the same types of discipline as the average citizen. Many sub-religions were treated poorly and unfairly, one of them being Puritanism. They made an uprising in the church, but after they started to go against the basic and common religious traditions normally held, other worshippers saw them as a threat. The church was full of arguments and contrasting opinions, with no true authority trying to end the fighting. Dispute within the church finally settled down during the reign of Queen Elizabeth I, and the mass seemed to be calm. However, with the news of a new free world, wealthy Puritans during the early 17th century began voyaging there once they officially broke off of the Church of England. They migrated in families, and it was a requirement for the society to be intelligent, which resulted in high literacy rates and the children attending school. They founded along Massachusetts Bay and set their church up in a system similar to that of the ones in Plymouth. They consisted of preaching elders, deacons, and saints. Massachusetts was originally created to be a money-making colony. However, it was later founded by English Puritists to make their idea of the perfect religious society they weren't able to get in Britain. Puritans had a very strict and proper way of life, and any horseplay was severely looked down upon. They were a society that was very close with God, and they had many reasons for being so strict. Some being they didn't want to face the wrath of God, they wanted to give back the rights given to them by God, and they wanted to carry out the will of God. To keep order within their society, they created documents that hold the laws of their town, much like we have today. One of these was the Puritan Legal Code. The code was a governmental document made in 1641 with strict laws that were to be followed by every citizen. It made crimes such as idolatry, witchcraft, blasphemy, and murder highly illegal, and the breakage of these laws could lead to severe punishments. Each citizen was expected to follow out these laws, and if one were to break them, not only would they be punished, but they would also be an outcast from society. They would be easy targets of accusations, and many would turn against them. Before the famous Salem trial started, two girls started to show odd signs that were not recognized medically, some being spasms in the air as they tried sleeping, weird sounds, unnatural body contortions, and strange changes in personality. These girls were named Abigail Williams and Elizabeth Parris. Elizabeth was the daughter of Reverend Parris, a Puritan minister. Their episodes were deemed as a result of witchcraft due to it being unexplainable by doctors. Reverend Samuel Parris was the father of Elizabeth Parris. He became an official minister after he decided against staying a merchant. He owned two slaves, one being Titspa, the other being John Indian. He married Elizabeth Eldridge, and together they had a total of 3 children. His niece was Abigail Williams, one of the 2 accusers that started the trials. Historians believe that Reverend Parris was the main cause of the trials, as one historian said,
We have been thus particular in relation to the settlement of Mr. Paris at Salem Village, it being one of the causes which led to the most bitter parochial quarrel that has ever existed in New England, and in the opinion of some persons was the chief or primary cause of that worldwide famous delusion, the Salem Witchcraft.
3 women were originally accused, one a Native American slave named Tituba, Sarah Good, and Sarah Osborne. Tituba was accused since the girls Abigail and Elizabeth claimed that she had visited them as a spirit. Reverend Paris, owning Tituba, beat her to get a confession from her. Sarah Good was accused for being poor and going from one door to another begging for handouts, and as someone people looked down upon in their society, she was quickly believed to be a witch. She was prescribed as having an evil hand by Dr. Griggs, the local Salem doctor. She was an unfavorable piece of society, a beggar, poor, and described as an old hag. Sarah Osborne was accused by Sarah Good because she didn't want to have the weight of being accused as a witch. Alongside Good, Tituba also accused Osborne. A reason people accused her was because she didn't attend Sunday church for 3 years due to having a long-lasting illness. Osborne was a remarried widow who was pregnant and had 2 children. On top of this, she attempted to claim property of her son's inheritance land. However, she failed to do this, and it added evidence to the initial accusation. Both Good and Osborne denied the accusations of witchcraft, but Tituba, however, affirmed the acclamation that all 3 women were witches. She also declared that herself and many citizens of Salem were witches as well. She claimed in her examination that cats had scratched her and told her to serve him, and she proceeded with how they scratched her after a prayer. She clearly started with Puritan thoughts before this event, since she says,
"Because I would not serve them, and when they went away, I could not see."
Sarah Good's daughter accused her of witchcraft, since she did. In Sarah Good's examination, she stated that she believed in
the God that made heaven and earth.
As a witch, she went into confinement in jail at the age of 6, right before her mother was hung. The accusation of witches soon became more popular and more girls started accusing others, their intent unknown. In total, 9 girls were afflicted in causing accusations. Along with accusations, the hunting of witches became more popular and correspondingly, the confirmation of being a witch. The confirmations were due to torture methods meant to make people confess. One torture method includes not letting victims sleep until they confess. This method was used often since it was an easy way to drive someone over the edge. Ways people were tested to be witches included searching for the devil's mark, which usually included birthmarks and moles, but it's used to see if someone made a compact with the devil. The easiest way of execution for Salem was hanging. There were many sites for hanging, and all but one executions were done by hanging during the trials. During one of the hangings, a priest fully recited a passage from the Bible. This was one of the tests that witches supposedly couldn't pass. There was an uproar and the crowd tried to stop the hanging by claiming not guilty, but the priest was still hanged. Cotton Mather, an important figure, explains the trials and his understanding. Mather was popular for having a stalwart belief in the devil's direct influence through the physical world from the spiritual realm. He was one of the first historians of the trials. He says that the witches' actions heavily influenced the trials. In his book, The Wonders of the Invisible World, he talks about how Satan likes to manipulate children, and due to kids being curious,
the cruelly venomous asp has pulled many of them into the deep hole of witchcraft itself.
Things soon became out of hand with the number of 20 deaths, more than 200 accusations, and the death of 2 dogs. There were many torturous acts done to the accused and 1 death from the torture dealt to them, while the other 19 were caused by hanging at Gallows Hill and other hanging locations. After the accusation of Governor Phipps's wife, the trials have been stopped and deemed unlawful on the account of false evidence. Those who were held in prison were released and pardoned, and emancipation was given to their families and the families of those who were executed or those who died in prison. Some let free suffered from trauma and damage, such as Good's child. Many citizens of Salem carried long-lasting fear of witches, and they still felt hysteric even though it died down after the trials had been deemed unlawful. Despite all the knowledge of the events within the trials, no one is quite sure as to why they began in the first place. There have been many theories, but due to the odd occurrences of the trials, it's hard to pinpoint why exactly the girls first started the accusations. These theories include ergot poisoning, boredom, attention, fear of the occult and contrasting religions, and rivalries and disputes. Many of these theories are possible. Even after the release of all the persecuted peoples, many still carried resentment and hate towards the town and event itself, and some even had the audacity to continue accusing innocents. The Salem witch trials still linger with every American citizen, and the atmosphere of the town of Salem was heavy and never quite went back to normal in the following years. It is engraved in our history, and it is commonly used as an example of what can happen when ignorance takes over logic. It's devastating to think it ever happened, and we can only build off of it to try and do what's right. With every great conflict comes a compromise. These trials were looked upon when writing rights, and it helped people get freedom of religion within the U.S. The change made trials a lot more fair to average citizens. They aren't able to be tried on spectral or flimsy evidence, which protects them from false claims or arrests. Salem reminds us how one falsehood could lead to more tragic outcomes, but with time and the realization of the masses, a compromise can come through to settle a terrible incident.